online. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Fritz, a special, welcome and thank you to you for your academic leadership. Thank you so much. And of course, we thank our research chair, Prof Moalafhi, as well, for continual support for a commitment towards the SGSP program. And of course, we thank our SGSP students as well for the hard work and the efforts they've been putting into their program. Without actually taking the welcoming remarks that will still be delivered by our executive director, the Directorate of Research, Innovation and Partnership, Dr. Anna Matos-Kuresis. She's just a little bit busy. She will step in a short while as well. And the purpose for me here is basically to share with us. Aha, here she is. Okay, thank you so much. The Madam Director asked me to continue. So the purpose of my standing before you basically is to share with us the purpose, the objective of this writing clinic. As we all know, when we look at the literary word clinic, we go to clinic, when there is, the first line of defense, cannot take care of, should I say, some situations. Then we go to the clinic to seek, further assistance to have some boost in terms of whatever the issue might be. So here is a clinic in terms of assisting our SGSP students towards achieving part of their aims, the reason why they are here, to actually complete their PhD studies, and of course to have outputs, because most times when we do research at this level, it is expected that outcome of such research needs to be disseminated to the scientific body, either through presentation at conferences or through publication. So the purpose of the first purpose is capacity. The purpose of this clinic is to build, or should I say, to further build capacity. Capacity in terms of knowledge and ability to be able to write a manuscript of quality that can be published in peer-reviewed journal. So remember, once you have the capacity, it's like giving a bird, like a bird that is winning. Once the wings are wing and strong enough, then they can be used to fly. So when you are capacitated, you acquire the necessary knowledge, then the rest is for you to be able to fly and write from then on your own manuscript and publication. And from there, you will be able to also teach others. That is what the capacity is all about. So the first aim of this clinic is basically to capacitate and ensure that the necessary, should I say, knowledge are acquired. Second, objective is to ensure that the manuscript that you have, is developed, to a point where it will be ready for publication. Remember, your output is what is desirable, not only for yourself as students, but also for the university, NOST, in which you are registered. That's number two. Number three, SASSCAL is expecting, output from the research you are doing. And not to say the least, the funder itself will be expecting some output from the research. So they will be happy if at the end of the day, you are able to have, published output from your research work. And you remember the primary purpose for you basically is to graduate, complete your studies, and of course, graduate. However, part of the PhD studies is, to have research, publication from such output. I happen to know, without mentioning names, a colleague's spouse that just graduated recently, and when they were actually capping the colleague, I saw 7 publications for his PhD work. And people just say, wow. Wow is just the response to be able to have 7 publications, from a PhD work. It shows commitment, it shows, versatility, it shows competency and the capacity that we are talking about. And all this competence and capacity, it's the belief that you already have it. It's just like this clinic is intended to nurture that competency which you have. You have written, for you to even have a manuscript at this level, it shows you already possess that competency and that capacity. So the essence is now to nurture that competency to a level that, of course, can get into, the stage of being published. And without much ado, I think let's, work assiduously. Let's actually, take all the points, all the, should I say, the coaching that will be provided by Dr. Fritz, our international expert that is joining us on that will be facilitating online from Prof Moalafhi, myself, and our colleagues. Knowledge is, it's like, I don't know how to put it. It's everywhere, and it's not enough. The more you can get, the more it is. I'm still, as they always say, we will learn and continue acquiring knowledge till the last day. Every day we learn. So take every advantage of the knowledge you are able to acquire today. And once you acquired it, it's yours forever. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Prof. I will not waste a lot of time because we are already behind schedule. I would like to call upon our own Executive Director, Dr. Anna Matros-Gorathos, to just give us the welcoming remarks.
Thank you, and apologies. But it shows our. Do I have to send here?
Send it anywhere, but the camera.
Okay. All right. So good morning, everyone. Also the ones online. Like I was saying, apologies for coming in late. But that's one of the beauties about what we do here at HGPS and SGSP. We do it in unconventional ways. So we do the welcoming after the overview. So, it's a pleasure, and it's so nice to see you, Professor Moalafhi. It's really lovely to have you with us here. And I think Prof. Alfulo maybe already said it all, but I understand, of course, to start on the right foot and to have a proper setting is quite important. But I think I will just touch a little bit on 2 or 3 things on this in the welcoming. Normally, they just say you should say welcome, and really, like, I think the director of ceremony was trying to hint that please don't make it too long. We are behind schedule. It's fine. But maybe for the purpose, the benefit of others. So I'm Anna Matros. I'm saying others, and I'm looking at the camera. It looks weird. But Dr. Schmuhl, did I say that correctly? It's also very, very, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. And I think, when we look at where we come from, when at this, for me, it's quite a fortunate incident. You have a professional chair literally in physical presence, guiding the development of publications and guiding, how we are going to be going around to get outputs from our students today. But also, I think it's a fantastic idea to have a publisher. Exactly, to also say, look, these are the expectations from an established and esteemed journal perspective. And so, I mean, after all of this support, what else do we need, right, to push our papers through? I just wanted to get a sense, how many of us have published thus far? No, not the postdocs. from the students, do we have any review papers, any conference papers, any journal papers? Not yet. It is in the making. We have enough information. It's about the packaging. Okay. All right. No, that's good. I mean, I think it's really good so that we can aim at getting at least 3 papers out there in our journey. We are in our second year, isn't it? Second or is it final year? Final year. Okay. All right. No, this is fine. But how many of us have attended conferences and had abstracts that were expected for those conferences? Yeah. All right. So all of us, that's great. At least I was getting worried a little bit now. But look, there are 2 things or 3 things. It really depends on how the studies have been designed, whether you're focused on a thesis or it's published or paper based on papers and so on. But I think either way, we talked about in previous writing retreats, because I think writing retreats are coming out of your ears now, because we had quite a few. Prof Moalafhi, for your information, we did emphasize on finding your own identity when writing your papers, so that at the end of the day, when you're looking at, or anybody picks up a paper and say, oh, this is an Anna paper for sure, you know. So it's finding that identity and being able to then work with the information that you have and package it such that it becomes your own and that you can own it. Even though we are, making use of literature out there, but over and above that, it's also important that we look at the impact that this publication will make, right? So it's 3 I's. I want to just say, I'm almost done, Madam Director. So the first one is your identity. The second one is the impact that you're trying to. What is the message? After anybody reads this paper, what would be that take home to say, wow, this has been quite, inspirational, or this has added to my work, personal work, or whatever the case may be. And the last one, and we've been talking about innovation for the longest time. Now, what innovation means in our settings really depends on how you will define it. What will be that new thing? I know, when you do a PhD, it's about finding that new knowledge and contributing to that one drop of water in the bucket. But when you're writing your paper, because remember, your paper is setting up the sort of, if you think of a garden path, it's setting up those pebbles or the stones that you walk on to get to whether it's the forest or the swimming pool or whatever it is that you think gives you peace of mind. And that's the papers, right, that you're working on. So what is that innovation that already at this point you can weave into your publication? But so those are the 3 I's I will leave you with. I know we've got 2 days, right, for this retreat. This is 2 days, which is normally not, enough, I think, but I think it's enough time for us to think about some of these things and already find our voice in the research, scholarly work that is out there. And I'm sure Dr. Schmuhl will be able to add some wisdom to all of that, because really it really speaks to what SGSP has put out there and how we can make sure that some of your pathway towards your thesis at the end of the day is something that not just you can work on and be proud of it, but everybody else can work, and they can all work to get to your peace of mind, if I can call it that. But with those few words, welcome to the writing retreat. We are looking forward to it. Even myself, even if I'm not going to be here all the time, I'm sure we'll have a bit of time to touch base. And I think it's really an honor for us, for Prof Moalafhi, to be here, and because he has been dedicated and committed to SGSP development of capacity with our students. So it would be fantastic to see how we can contribute towards your papers at the end of the day. Thank you so much, and all the best for the writing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Angie, for those welcoming remarks. I'm not sure if we want to take advantage of Dr. AMG's presence to take a group picture before she goes, and then we can quickly come back and then we start. That just 1 minute, a group picture.
What about Dr. Schmuhl?
We'll put the laptop like this. So just a quick group picture, then we come back and then we start with our application clinic.
All right. Right.
It's just 1 minute. Okay, I think we can now start our publication clinic. I would like to call Dr. Fritz. I don't even know how to pronounce that. To please start our publication clinic. I think we'll be talking about logical manuscript structure. That will be our first topic for today's publication clinic. Over to you, Doctor.
Dr. Lemini, thank you very much. If you can just start the presentation on your side. I arranged with Professor Moalafhi that it will be done from your side. That'll probably be easier.
Okay.
So while you do that, from my side, a big hello to everybody. I have to upfront apologize for my voice. I got a bad cold over the weekend, so I have every now and then my voice gives away, unfortunately. I hope it'll go well. First of all, thanks to Professor Moalafhi, who invited me for this publication clinic. He was being quite instrumental in arranging this, so thank you very much. And a big thank you to Dr. Dlamini, then Dr. Awofolo, and Dr. Matros for their introductions. I want to pick up on the 3 points that Dr. Matros mentioned: identity, impact, and innovation, because I think that very accurately captures the focus of what will be done today. for identity, for a big part, that is something that will grow during the time that you work as an academic or as a researcher. That'll take time to get to the point where you fully feel that your identity can be put into the paper. But on impact and innovation, those are certainly areas we will be working on today, because very much a big part of what you need to do when you are engaging in research and then subsequently have to provide a research output is very much thinking about how to create impact with what you're doing and what is the innovation that you are putting forward, because those 2 points are points that very much are looked at when you submit a paper. Just again about my voice, if you have difficulty following me, please don't hesitate to interrupt me, to just ask me to say again what I just said. So broadly speaking, what I really hope we will be able to achieve is that I can give you some tips and tricks about maneuvering what arguably can be a very challenging obstacle course. It's not only about writing the paper, putting it together, looking at the author guidelines that journals provide, following them, submitting your paper. It's about much more than that. It really is about immersing yourself very much into how a journal perceives of a paper, what they expect of their authors, what they expect authors to give to audiences, and the format that flows from that. But that's not where it ends, because once you've submitted a paper, you have to go through what can be a very challenging review process, where you have to usually submit different revised versions of your paper until the point when a decision is made whether it's accepted or published. And even then, it doesn't end there, because at that point, you also have to get engaged with the process on how to promote your paper quite effectively. So this publication clinic is about more than just being an author. It's also how to be an effective communicator. Your goal should not only to be published, but your goal also should be to be widely read in your field, sometimes by audiences that you didn't have in mind necessarily. It is in this way that you have impact and influence the advancement of your field, and by extension of your own career as well. And when your paper has more impact, your paper then in turn is more highly cited. That way you build your reputation within the immediate community that you're working in, but also worldwide, and importantly that for your institution, because as a researcher, you don't work in isolation only on your own work. You often work within teams. A lot of papers are published with a number of authors, so you work together with them. And publishing a paper also means that you establish new international collaborations. All of these things together advance your career. Could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, this is just what I covered a little bit, and then please hit the space button 3 times so we can just show the 3 blocks on here. So first of all, what we're going to cover is what is a logical manuscript structure. This works a little bit across most fields. It doesn't really apply that, or the differences rather between different fields are very minimal, because this is broadly speaking about what does an academic paper look like, as opposed to a paper that you might publish in a business publication, etc. Next one, that will be what your publication strategy would be, because as I mentioned earlier, it's not only about following the rules for how to put together the paper for a specific journal. Once a paper is published, there's more work to do. You have to work through that as well. And then finally, here we look at the process of journal submission, because it's not only about getting your article ready. You have to very much immerse yourself also in a journal to figure out what exactly is it that they expect of you, how do papers differ in that journal from another journal? What specifically is the submission process for a specific journal, because that can also differ, and how you maneuver the whole process of that. Next slide, please. So let me tell you a little bit about the publishing house that I work for. I've been in publishing a very long time. I have to say, much longer than practically everybody as a student in this retreat has been on the face of this earth. So I have seen publishing really from a whole different range of perspectives. Spring in Nature, we are a leading global research publisher, and we receive a staggering more than 1 million papers a year across the almost 3,000 journals that we publish. Of those more than 1 million submissions that we get, that will result in more than 350,000 articles that we publish. And for all of the articles that we publish, not only in a given year, but also in the archive that we have of articles, more than 1 billion downloads are generated from that. In addition to the almost 3,000 journals that we publish, we also are the biggest international academic book publisher. We publish at the moment just over 13,000 books a year across all different disciplines. All of this is done, all of the 3,000 journals, the more than 13,000 books that we publish, gets done with the help of more than 90,000 academic editors spread out across the world. And of course, for every publication that we have, you need peer reviewers. And at the moment, we have more than 750,000 peer reviewers also spread out across the globe that'll help us on doing that. We have different publication imprints, as you can see on the left-hand side. Spring in Nature is the umbrella imprint that we have, but underneath that hang a lot of different imprints. Springer, that'll account for the vast majority of the journals and the books that we publish. But there are also other ones that you will know. For instance, one of our biggest publications, of course, is Scientific American. In addition to that, that's not shown here because it falls under the Springer imprint, Scientific Reports, a journal where we publish more than 30,000 articles a year. And then, without going through all of them, you see also the Nature portfolio. The flagship journal of that, of course, is the very well-known Nature journal. But then also underneath that, we have a lot of quite a fast-growing portfolio of journals, particularly the communication journals. Could we have the next slide, please? Sorry, very important, and this has been the biggest change that we've seen in academic publishing during the last, at the moment, more than 20 years. And that has been the gradual shift from the traditional subscription-based publication, where an article is published and then an institution buys a subscription, following which the researchers at that institution can have access to the articles. The shift has been very much towards open access, where from the very beginning, an article is permanently accessible to anybody with an internet connection. And also, importantly, the full copyright of the article remains with the authors. And that means that an article can be reused in ways that are quite different from a subscription-based journal. At the moment, we have the more than 1.25 million research articles that are published with open access. It's called Gold Open Access, where from day one, there's no embargo. From day one, the article is fully accessible and it remains fully accessible. It's not only limited journals. We also do open access books. At this point, we publish a rate of 13,000 books that we publish a year. In excess of 3,000 of those get published as an open access title. Very importantly also is that nearly half of the Sustainable Development Goal related articles are published in open access. That often has to do with the kind of funding that underpinned the research for those articles. And a very important part that came into existence the last couple of years, whereas before open access was really limited to an author paying the article processing charge in order for the article to be published as open access. The last couple of years, the shift has very much been towards transformative agreements, what is shown at the bottom as TAs. Now, the transformative agreements are when we enter into agreements with institutions or with a bunch of institutions coming together to form a consortium, where a certain number, a certain quota of articles that they agree from their institution will be published as open access annually. And that is driving quite a lot of the open access growth during the last couple of years. And on the right-hand side, you see the main imprints that I touched on a little bit before. A lot of these imprints account for the biggest growth that we have on open access at the moment. Next slide, please. And finally, if we look at the just at the spectrum of what we publish, I already showed you some of the imprints that we have. It really goes across quite a broad range, both on the books and on the journal side. It is not that we only publish journal articles or books. Within that there are differences in what we publish. If you look at the far left-hand side, the major reference works, for more than 175 years now, we've been a leading reference work publisher. So predominantly encyclopedias. The last couple of years, a lot of the major reference works then moved into databases. On the lower left-hand side, you see the handbooks here. We're still quite a major publisher, especially for tertiary education in terms of handbooks, but also, very importantly, handbooks for professionals. An example of that that will not apply to you necessarily, but for instance, handbooks within clinical medicine, but also in other disciplines. And then the rest of the kind of publication formats you see here. Next slide. Sorry, next slide, please. Okay, and the next one. So now let's move into really the start of what we want to cover the next 4 days. First of all, let's work through what really constitutes a logical manuscript structure. I've mentioned to you before that this is very broadly the same across all disciplines. A journal might require you to have a slightly different format that will deviate from this, but broadly is going to be this. I think the one difference here might be a review paper, where in a review paper, your objective is a little bit different. You're not going to be talking a great deal about methodology, unless methodology is a key part of what you are reviewing, the literature that you're reviewing. But for an original research paper, what we're going to be looking at here is what is the structure and what are the questions in particular that readers ask that very importantly shape what you do in your paper. So readers are going to have 4 key questions for you. The first one, if you can just hit the space button, thank you. Why did you do the study? From the first question, the purpose and the structure of your manuscript is going to be led by these questions. And these questions in turn mirror what is called the traditional IMRAD structure of a good manuscript. An IMRAD, an acronym that stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. The next question, the first question that we have is, why did you do the study? So if you can hit the space button, please. The second one is, what did you do in fact? Next one, please. What did you find? And next one. Then how does the study advance the field? And next one, please. And here you start seeing how the structure follows that your paper will have to be structured by due to these questions. The first question, why did you do the study? That will, in broad terms, shape your introduction. The second question, what did you do? That will allow you to discuss the methods that you used, or the methods maybe that you even developed. The third one, what did you find? Here you will sketch the results that came out of your research. And finally, how does the study advance the field? That'll determine your discussion to close off your paper. So let's go through the key elements of the manuscript. Let's start with the introduction. Next slide, please. For the introduction, it's always advisable to start very broadly. Look at the image that you see here, the inverted triangle, because we're going to get back to this triangle in a slightly different shape towards the end of the presentation. So in any given paper, it's really advisable to start off quite broadly, and then you start guiding your readers to your aims. The benefit of starting off broadly is that if you manage to capture a broader audience, to get them interested in your research, then you're more likely to have a broader impact than what is an arguably narrow group of researchers who might zoom in on one or two aspects of your topic only. Especially if you're going to be publishing in a multidisciplinary journal. And remember, quite a lot of research end up in multidisciplinary journals. It is really important to start off as broadly as possible, not only focusing on the audience that you're targeting your paper at, because if let's, for argument's sake, say you are doing a paper on sustainable water resources, it's a paper with a very technological focus. So your key audiences, you're targeting people who work in a similar vein as you do similar research. But bear in mind that not only those people might be interested, you might also be interested in capturing policymakers. So start off broadly and then work towards the narrower point. At the same time, remain mindful of what audience you're aiming at, depending on the journal that you're going to be choosing. If it's, for instance, a global audience, or does the topic you're writing about play out better with a more regional audience? That's a very important question to ask yourself right at the beginning. Sorry for that. Also, if you're targeting a broad audience, then you may have to explain some jargon up front, whereas for a very specialized audience, this may not be necessary. We're getting back to the point of jargon use later on, where at the beginning, and this also will be reflected in the title that I'll talk later on, we have to be a little bit sparing in what kind of jargon you use at the outset, but we'll get to that in a minute. This brings us to the majority of the introduction, which is the literature review, which also allows authors to demonstrate, very importantly, their familiarity with what has been published in the field already. And it also demonstrates their own expertise in the field. So when readers see that expertise, and remember, you're not only thinking about the readers of your paper, you first have to get your paper accepted for review and then through the review process. So with the readers, in this case, I also mean not only the final readers, but also the editor-in-chief of a journal and the peer reviewers. When they see the expertise that you demonstrate, because you have a very good grasp of the literature that's been published in the field already, that's going to create greater trust and confidence in your work. which is not only important for the peer review process, but also important for readers after publication. And once you've introduced what is currently known in the field, you now need to highlight what is the knowledge gap in the field, which is, if you think about it, that's really the motivation why the research needed to be done in the first place. And once you've identified the research problem, that then directly leads you to the specific aims of the paper, and those aims should directly highlight why this paper is important for the field or the society. So once again, keep in mind this picture here with the inverted triangle. You start out very broadly, the broad context of what you're going to be doing, and then through the literature review, the knowledge gap, you then bring the reader down to the very specific aims of what you're going to be addressing in the rest of the paper. Next slide, please. Now, we get to the methods section, which really shows what the authors have done. This is going to be very important for researchers in the field, because they might want to replicate what you've done, or they want the confidence that the study was done properly. The point of replication is really quite important, because in any kind of research, it is important that for a reader, for another researcher working on a similar topic, that they can read through your methodology and either be able to, based on your description, go and use the methodology again, replicate the research in order to come to the same results, or at the very least have the confidence that what you sketched there is sufficient for them to have a basis of understanding that you created a methodology, or if you didn't create one yourself, that you followed a methodology that is rigorous in every way and will stand up to repetition. As important for the readers to get confidence in what you've done, it's also very important for reviewers, as this is one of the first sections that they're going to very carefully evaluate, because if they identify any flaws of any kind in the methodology or in the techniques, that in turn could invalidate the data that you present later on in the paper. And if the data and the figures presented are being invalidated, or there are doubts that it might be invalidated, that likely means that the conclusion that you present at the end of the paper will be insufficiently supported. And the outcome of that right at the start is your paper is being rejected. Usually you won't get a message back from the journal to say that to go through a long description to say why your methodology is found to be flawed. It just is rejected. So you're really at a loss at that point. So this is one of the key areas that you have to pay particular attention to ensure that what you present is very rigorous and will stand up to the scrutiny that it will be put through during the review process. Next slide, please. So let's delve a little bit deeper in the methods section to figure out, what do your readers need to know? Well, they need to know, first of all, what was used in the study, then how you conducted the study, and then you have to be very clear, for instance, on the conditions and the controls, and very importantly, how you analyzed your data. What we do in most journals, we usually encourage authors who use statistics to get support from a statistician. Even though you're very good in statistics, we really advise to do that, because statistical errors or flaws are very frequently identified by reviewers. And this is probably one of the most common causes for rejecting a paper. So in the previous slide, I discussed already the great danger that you the great risk that you're running here, that if any flaws identified or there's doubt about the data that you're presenting right here or within the methodology, already there is cause for rejections. So this is really a very important point to pick up on, to ensure that what you present is as rigorous as possible. Next slide, please. So now, now that you've talked about what you've done, you've sketched your methodology very clearly. And as I mentioned before, this is either methodology that you developed or it's a methodology that is known in the field that you've reused, and you sketched very clearly what that methodology is. What you now want to do is you want to highlight what you found in your research in the results section, which is the next key question a reader will have. Think about the 4 questions that I had right at the beginning. In this, the emphasis is very much on the logical presentation of ideas. Now, this may not necessarily be the chronological order in which your results were identified, but for the purpose of a reader understanding very clearly what you've done, it is the most logical way to present to readers who may not be familiar with a study. First, you're going to be looking at the initial observation, what you're expecting to find, but then you need to expand on that observation and characterize in greater detail, maybe try to understand it mechanistically, for example, or you have to look at it in other contexts and then explain, why is this observation going to be in fact useful in the field? Why is it going to be applicable? How can the field build on it? And showing the practical applicability can be particularly important for journals focusing more on applied science and basic science, which is also an important point later on in this workshop when it comes to choosing the right journal. So let me use an example, and it in fact is very much the example that is shown in this picture as well. So this author had developed a new water membrane for water treatment. So that's going to be your initial characterization. If you look at the top bit, talking about how the membrane was fabricated. And then you need to characterize the different physical characteristics or the chemical characteristics under different conditions. And then finally, we get to the application point where you demonstrate that the membrane in fact does work, that it actually is useful. But for that, you may want to present data related to its efficacy to remove, or let's say, particulates from wastewater or whatever the objective was here. So that you build on starting out with the initial observation, going through the characterization, and then the application that you had developed it for, and then end with the data to show the efficacy, show the applicability of this membrane in a real life situation. Next slide, please. Sorry, just 1 second. Very importantly, because the results section that will form quite a substantial part of your paper. It's going to be very, or quite often, it's quite a densely written piece. You have a page constraint in any journal. Most journals will either give you in the author or in the submission guidelines, they'll give you a page length limit, and if not, if you don't see it there, it is good to go and look at a random number of articles published recently in the journal and look at what is the average page length of that. When you do that, you usually will exclude the references, so go and look only at the body text, and that then in turn will dictate very much your results section, which is going to be a big part of your article. How long can that be? The reason I mentioned this is that this is the part where it's very easy to throw too much information at a reader in a very concise, very dense format. So you really have to pay attention to present your data here as clearly and as descriptively as possible. So it's important when describing results not to overwhelm readers with new and complex information. What we advise is present the information in one chunk at a time. And we recommend, for instance, focusing on one figure or one table at a time, not put all of them on one page and then start discussing them one by one. If it's a complex figure, for instance, with say 6 panels, then for instance, we advise first discuss 3 panels in one paragraph and then the next 3 panels in another paragraph. We recommend for this short paragraphs, particularly in the results section, because those are easy for readers to look through and be able to understand. Remember, as I said at the beginning, you don't come here with new information. You build on what you've already presented in the paper so far. In looking at the structure of the paragraphs, what you do here, there's also logical structure to those paragraphs in this section. The idea here is to introduce to readers systematically to what they are looking at. Remember, you very well versed. You know this data, you know the description here inside out. You're presenting that to somebody who's completely new. You've just presented your methodology. People have to get their head around that. Then you throw a lot of data at them that they're not familiar with. So you have to present that in a quite logical structure. So what we advise here is you go with, here's the figure. And again, you don't throw all the figures in one go. Go for one figure at a time. So here's the figure, here's the table. And then based on that, you discuss the important trends and relationships that hopefully the reader can see in your figure. And then you move on to the next figure or the table. So do remember, chunk up the results as much as possible so that you build from the one chunk of information to the next one. And then when you get to the end of that, try to summarize overall why this figure or trend is relevant. The point here is, what is really the takeaway message that you want to give to readers? That is something that has to be at the back of your mind and at the front of your mind constantly when you're in the results section. Bear in mind, though, this is not the interpretation yet, because interpretation only comes in the discussion section, which is an author's opinion about the results. Here, you're just giving a summary of the information, just giving a summary of that one figure, for instance. So if you as the author will be going to have the reader remember one thing about the figure, you have to ask yourself, what is that? What is the key takeaway message that you want the author in the results section to remember at this point? And then after having presented new information, again, ask yourself, what is the key takeaway message here? You build on that very much. By having that kind of takeaway message, it helps the reader also to focus on what is the most important information that they should try to remember. And that ties in then later to your discussion section. Next slide, please. So I asked you before, please look at that inverted triangle where we worked from a very broad base, narrowing that down, the broad base being the much wider context in which your research can be placed. You then drill down to the very narrow focus, the narrow aims of your paper, of where you ended up with your research and what you want to put into the paper. And in the discussion, we're actually going to flip that a little bit around. So you've just guided the reader through the figures in your results section, and now you move on to discussion. And the discussion is, in fact, I just mentioned that the opposite of the introduction. You started broadly, you try to capture somebody's interest, but then you started guiding the reader down to the specific aims of your study. In the discussion, you need to emphasize how that specific study is going to be applicable to that broad audience you're trying to capture. You just work towards a point in through the method section, then the results to a very narrow and very specific point. So what you do here is you emphasize that the specific study is applicable to the broad audience. And now it's important to keep in mind that the particular implications and recommendations will be relevant to them, which will make a reader understand why the study is important or valid to begin with. The beginning of discussion will generally summarize overall what you've done. It could be useful to highlight the research problem again, just remind them again a little bit where you started off, in order to place it again in the context of the key findings. The majority of the discussion, though, is going to be interpretation. Remember, I mentioned in the results section, you're not interpreting your findings there, you're not interpreting data there, you're just sketching that. Here in the discussion section, you are in fact moving on to interpretation, which means the structure of that is, here are the findings, here is what we think the findings mean. Then, very importantly, here are the shortcomings we came across, and as importantly, you provide an overall synthesis of how the findings are valuable for your field. What is really key here is the point on value, because this is what reviewers and readers are concerned about. What is it that you actually contributed to the field that is novel, that was not present before? Every journal paper that is submitted to a journal, the understanding of a journal is you are presenting novel research, novel findings that have not been done before. It's discussable how novel everything can be, because nobody comes up with every bit of research with an entirely new finding that will shift the field substantially forward. Most research at the end of the day is very incremental only. Nevertheless, that incremental shift that you bring, there has to be a certain measure of novelty, there has to be value in that, and that is very much what you sketch here as well. Now, very importantly, and this is something that especially for young researchers that they may not be familiar with, in addition to the positive results that you're going to sketch, you never can leave out unexpected or negative results, because that is regarded as selective report bias. And do take note of this term, selective report bias. And that is something that authors never should be doing, because they should present all of the information related to the study, either within the main text or in the supplementary information. And they also have to highlight any key limitations the study had and the impact that those limitations had on the validity of the study overall. Some journals will even sketch, although it's not very common, but some journals in their submission guidelines will even sketch to you to what extent you should be presenting unexpected or negative results. The reason that is being done, I mentioned to you at the beginning, the importance of sketching your methodology very clearly is that research can be replicated if somebody else should wish. That also, the sketching the methodology clearly also helps an editor-in-chief, a reviewer, and an author understand how well you grasp what kind of methodology has been used so far, or if you develop new methodology, it also helps indicate very much that the extent of the methodology, you really grasp the impact of that as well. Negative results are very important because it shows that maybe in the research question that you had to change it during the course of the research. But negative results also help other researchers. It will prevent them from going down the same route, because already it is known that if you do this, it doesn't work. So it's also an efficiency or a resource question that you're addressing here. Don't go down that route. We tried that, it doesn't work, and this is the reason why, and that was the outcome. So that is, it may sound counterintuitive, but it's actually an amazingly important part to address unexpected or negative results. Unexpected results, I can't think of a very specific one now, but in medical sciences, for instance, sometimes research was done in one area that proved to be completely fruitless, but in the process, another medication was found sheer by accident. That is the kind of unexpected result that can even happen in any field that you're working in. So it's important to put it in there. And then finally, we have the conclusion at the end of the discussion section. Sometimes this depends a little bit on the journal. It will be a separate section. Often, though, it's just a final paragraph in which the author emphasizes what is the main conclusion, which hopefully is solving the problem in the field, the problem that you sketch right at the beginning. But then also discuss in the conclusion why this is useful, how you can, as a reader, put this information into action. You may have a specific message for academics. It could be for policymakers, could be for educators, for a range of audiences. Do think, as I mentioned at the beginning, there may be more audiences than you will capture than you set out or imagined you will do. So do think a little bit about who may be reading this and what value you can offer to them. And then again, emphasizing the value of the study and its findings, really an important part of how you end your article. Because this is the final point of being able to capture more than the very targeted audience that you set out to do right at the beginning. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's just go back at the four key questions that I had right at the beginning. The four key questions of a reader that will very much structure the different elements of your manuscript, and how it remains important to reflect in each section whether it is sufficiently linked to those four questions. First of all, why the study needs to be done in the first place. That's the part where you introduce the topic very broadly. You work through all of the literature to show especially the current work that supports what you do, that contextualizes what you do. After that, you pose the research question that led you to this research, that shaped the research that you did. From that follows the objectives, and then the methodology, and after that the results and the figures that you generated. Those, of course, tie again back into the objectives, and they need to tie back again in a very specific manner in your research question. When you've done all of that, you get to the point of the question about what did you find. There you start discussing after that. You discuss the summary of your findings, the interpretations, the implications of the field, and again you tie that in the conclusion section, again with your research question to show where you set out what you find and what is the value that will take the field forward. So yeah, at this point, we're a little bit early. I try to make up very much for the time as well. We'll move to, sorry, I just want to, look at my own, just bear with me. I just want to look at my own notes here to see where we. Oh no, the next section we can do as well. So next slide, please. Okay, so we've worked broadly now through all of the main structure of the main components of what your paper is going to look like. Now I want to focus a little bit on very specific parts in that may sound to you before you've written your first paper to be a little bit less important, but all of these tie in together to emphasize again that there's no part of the manuscript that deserves less importance, less attention, because same as when you walk into a room for the first time, you're meeting people you've never met before, you know the expression that first impressions count enormously. This is very much what we're looking at here when we get to the point of the title. So let's start with now moving a little bit away from the broad structure, but to different elements of the paper that you really need to look at. So of course, then, so it needs to get the reader's attention very much. Readers do online searches, they go to Web of Science, they go to Scopus, or wherever they see long lists of titles, and it is hard to grab their attention, because you know what it's like. If you do a search in Scopus or in Google, you see a whole page and then page after page of long titles. It is difficult to see a title that really jumps out of you. So authors should keep in mind that titles should always emphasize what is valuable about the study. Very importantly, the scholarly databases that your article will be indexed in and the search engines, they use both the title and the keyword list for indexing. So it's important to think of the title and the keywords working in tandem and having those keywords, or at least the main ones, in the title as well. What is key is to be as concise as possible. You're sketching in a highly condensed form what your study is about. You're not narrating the whole study. You're not giving a long-winded description here of what it's about. You need to narrow that down really to the main point that you're focusing on. This is also very important for the search engines, as all search engines have a very fixed character limit. So if you're looking at a title that on a printed page will go over 2 lines, for instance, bear in mind you're looking at the bigger font, so 2 lines, you're not looking at as many characters as in the body text. If you go beyond the 2 lines, then you're almost sure your title is going to be cut off at a certain point because of the character limit. So that is quite important to bear in mind. Generally, we recommend not using questions in the title, and at all costs avoid being vague. This is an academic paper. This is not a polemic paper that you write, for instance, in the newspaper. Therefore, being as clear as possible is really essential. And finally, avoid using abbreviations or jargon or acronyms, which to a broad audience may be confusing. If your paper is going to be published in a highly specialized journal that is read by a highly specialized audience, that's fine. But in general, we do advise try and avoid the very specific jargon, acronyms, or abbreviations, because that might deter a broader audience from wanting to look at the rest of your paper. A nice strategy to guide you through how to write a title is to consider, first of all, what was investigated. Let's say there was a variable that you're looking at. What was measured? For instance, that could be a key outcome. and from where those measurements were taken. So that could be the sample. These are really the three key things that readers want to know, that emphasize the importance of the study to show why it was novel, why it is valid, and what is applicable about the findings that you had in the field. Next slide, please. So I just need to go to myself to the. So then the next part, in addition to the title, also working physically in a paper down from the top. The abstract is going to be the next really key part for this. Now, importantly, you're not here. I'm not talking necessarily about readers only. This is also one of the parts that not only people in the field will be reading, but mostly this is also going to be a make or break decision on whether the paper is going to be read by the authors. But importantly, when your paper is being submitted and an editor-in-chief looks at the paper, and an associate editor or handling editor who's going to be managing the peer review process, they're also going to be looking at this. Very often, papers might not actually get past the point of somebody looking at the title, looking at the abstract to figure out, does it fit the aims and scope of the journal? At this point, an editor-in-chief or a handling editor may not necessarily look at your body text, at the substance of the paper. Here they're doing, first of all, a check to see, does it fit the aims and scope of the journal? So they don't delve into your paper to see whether it's academically rigorous, whether your methodology is credible, whether the data is presented well. They're just going to be looking at the title and the abstract to figure out, does it fit what we do in what we're focusing on in the journal? So already here is a key selling point of your article to them, is going to be the abstract. Well, every author likes to believe the paper will be read, but mostly, given the large number of papers readers come across, they will only briefly scan the abstracts to gauge whether it's of interest to them. So it's important to emphasize in this in the abstract why it was important, why it was significant, and why it's actually relevant to the field. Next slide, please. So here's very much the structure of what you're going to be doing. Key questions, again, that I mentioned right at the beginning, that any reader asks about a paper, that not only defines the structure of your paper as a whole, it also is going to define your abstract, because your abstract, in fact, is a mini version of your paper. So first of all, why did the study need to be done? Here you need to introduce why the topic is relevant and your research problem, and why what you focusing on the research problem is novel to the field. So you're hinting here at what you're going to be contributing to take the field forward. Then, same as in the structure of the paper, what did you do? Here you have to describe the methodology, what was the aims of the research that you're trying to achieve, and then next, what did you find? Same as in the paper, you summarize your key results here. You're not going to interpretation yet, because there you wait for the next question: how will the study advance the field? And here you study what is the main conclusion or conclusions, implications for the field. And as you mentioned earlier, I talked a couple of times about key messages you want readers to have. The sketching the value of what you've done. Here very much also you end with, why is this important for the what you found important for the field? Because this is the kind of, and as I said before, not every bit of research is really paradigm shifting or moves the field forward. in a very substantial manner. Most of it is quite incremental, but the incremental value that helps to take it forward a little bit, that's going to be put in here as well. So you also want to think again about the key audiences that you're going to have. And an extremely important about the abstract. The abstract follows directly after the title. So one would think, before you've ever written a paper, that the way you work through the whole structure when you sit down to eventually start writing the paper is you start with your title, you start with the abstract, and then you work through the structure that I sketched before. That's actually not the case. The two things you're going to be writing very much at the end. It's fine to have a working title when you set out to write your paper. Do think of a working title that can be as broad, as descriptive as you want. Later on, the rules that I set out earlier or just now about how to write a title, later on you can apply that rules. For the abstracts, though, for the abstract, it's enormously important. It's the very last piece that you're going to be writing. When you set out, you've got a working title, and then you start out in the paper. Don't be tempted to even think of what the abstract is going to look like, because the abstract is when you have a done paper, you sit back, you take in everything that you've done, you work through everything again. Then when your paper is done, then you write the abstract. So don't be tempted to do it too early, because the thing is, at the back of your head, you might get stuck in how you framed the abstract. So very importantly, wait till the very end. Next slide, please. I think we've actually gone. Next one, please. Yeah. So to end off on what is the logical manuscript structure, I already sketched this before when I talked about the title. An incredibly important part about the same as the title, for the abstracts, is that searchability really here is key. When your paper is published, it will be included in a host of abstracting and indexing services. Some of them working very much only with an academic environment. Other ones, if you look at the search engines that straddle the divide between academic and broader. For instance, if we look at Google Scholar, yeah, it's very important to keep in mind that for search engine optimization, you really have to follow the rules very much of what is set out there for how optimization works best. So the abstracts, as well as the title and the keywords, they're going to be really the most important elements for indexing your published paper, and then subsequently finding it as well. So it's important to keep as much, to give as much attention to the title, to the abstract, to the keywords, to ensure that the gist of what you want to put out there for an audience can be captured in a combination of title, abstract, and keywords. I've come to the end of the whole section on logical manuscript structure. I do appreciate it's a lot to take in. So we will pause here, and then tomorrow, by the way, you saw the program, there is going to be a recap on all of this, and then also in the one-on-ones, there will be ample opportunity to go back to whatever point was discussed here that you may want me to elaborate on. We can look at that. Professor Moalafhi, I think we can. I just want to cast an eye on the program. So I think we just 3 minutes. Okay, we've not lost too much time. We're 3 minutes away from the Q&A session, which, if you agree, we can start now then.
Thank you so much, Dr. I think we'll open now for questions. Any questions from the audience online and here. Any clarification? So we have about 20 minutes, I think, of questions. Then we break for the second question. Any question? I see Dr. Boy's hand is up. Please, you want to come? So you can come from there. Okay. Can you hear me, Dr. Fritz?
I can, but I have to admit the sound quality is not great. So I do apologize if anybody poses a question. I ask them to pose the question again because the sound sometimes cuts out a little bit.
Okay, I'm now closer to the computer. I hope it's audible enough. Okay. I know this might be a format that is mostly or used with Nature Journal, but on the presentation of the results and on the discussion, some journals I know sometimes they want the format, they want you to mix the results on the discussion. And then maybe some key advices there on how you could present, like for example, when you're presenting on the, instance, you presented the results separately, you said you separate it from the discussion, but what kind of advice would you give us? Say, for example, those journal published in has required that you put in the results and the discussions together.
Yeah. That is actually a point that I will be looking at later on. That comes under efficient publication strategy and successful journal submission, where it is incredibly important when you have written a paper. Now, the thing is, sometimes you write a paper and you already have in mind from the very start which journal you might be submitting a journal to. Which journal you might be submitting your article to. In some cases, you write your article and then you decide what are the key journals that would be relevant to this. Either way, before you submit, it's incredibly important to go through the submission guidelines or the author guidelines and do a combination of that and look at the published papers in the journal to see how, for instance, this point on discussion and results were addressed. Dr. Lamini, you very correctly mentioned that the nature journals do that quite differently. That is an editorial policy decision made by them. You often, for instance, see that some of their, depending on the nature journal, some of their articles can be substantially shorter than what you see in other journals. From that follows the point that they then combine the results and discussion to a much briefer point than you would see in other journals. So it's difficult for me to say do this or do that on those two sections, unless you look at what the journal demands that you should do. So this is an incredibly important point. What I see a lot, and as I mentioned at the beginning, I've been in publishing for decades now, and I can easily summarize what are some of the key reasons why papers don't even get accepted for review. Papers that are scientifically rigorous, that do bring novelty, or can demonstrate novelty in the research, that do fit the aims and scope of a journal, yet they still get rejected. And the question by an author then is, I know this research is valid. I know I've written a paper that is well put together. The results I present are credible and tested. Why was my paper not accepted for review? And sometimes it is for what admittedly may feel like a banal reason. The reason is that in the author guidelines, in the submission guidelines, it very clearly says, do this on the discussion, do that on the results, and the author failed to do that. And journals are very strict about that. If And it needn't be only about that. It could be about something completely different. It could be, for instance, some journals will have a very specific reference style that they demand that you, or they require rather, that you follow. And then we see that quite often a paper will be submitted that has a completely different reference style, and the paper is then rejected for review. So it is very important when you, once you've written your paper, to then also go and look what exactly is required of me by the specific journal that I want to submit to. Go and look at a couple of articles that already got published and ask yourself, does this, together with the submission guidelines, does my article reflect what has been published and what is being asked of me in the author guidelines? And then finally, perhaps just to mention, one does see disciplinary patterns as well on how the discussion and results section are defined. That needn't only be defined by the journal specifically. You quite often also see that specific disciplines have a habit or tradition of how to do that. And you figure that out also by looking at quite a number of journals in the field to see how the published version reflects that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fritz, for that. Prof Moalafhi.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Moalafhi. Thank you, Dr. Fritz. Thank you so much that you are a little bit under weather, but you managed to go through. Thank you so much. We very much appreciate. We hope you get better and better.
Fine,
yes. Thank you so much. I know it's a little bit too much for the participants to digest, but of course we very much leverage from the fact that the participants also have gone through other writing retreats. So we'll try as much as possible. I've seen from your slides that also there are from Spring and May other opportunities for us even to request the help. I think there are a lot of help that we can also benefit from visiting your website. But also, I thank you that you have also indicated that you are always available, even outside the Diaspora for one-on-ones. As much as I will be with the Prof, I will do also. That is greatly appreciated. Thank you for the first the presentation on the key questions. 4 key questions that run across the introduction, the methodology, the results, and the discussions, which also now when we go to the abstract, it's actually an overview of the whole paper, which the 4 questions also run across. I think this is very, very informative. I'm very happy that the students also will appreciate this. I think before I give back to the Director of Ceremonies for further questions, the discussions, to just alert you that from the facilitation, we're thinking that after the lunch, the question and answer for 10:45 to 12:45, the question and answer for 14:00 to 15:00 will be part of it, so that after lunch, it's just immediately one-on-one session. I think you'll be fine with that.
Yes, yeah, so, that's completely fine.
Yeah, from 2 to 5 p.m., it will just be one-on-one. So the question and answers will just be covered before lunch. That's what we wanted to forward. But otherwise, thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Okay, thank you very much, Moalafhi. Any questions from those online? Any questions? We still have time. Our tea break starts at 10, 15 minutes. Okay. If there are no questions, then probably we can break for tea break. Tea break is ready. Tea is ready. Okay, Prof.
Sorry, Madam Chair, for the afterthought.
Yes.
Morning, Dr. Fritz. once again. I just want to, I'm not sure, my question basically is not, maybe it's not directly related to, the content of what has been presented, but I have my own idea in terms of the approach. So perhaps you can also, from your wealth of experience, perhaps, if you can share with our, should I say, academics here and upcoming emerging researchers in terms of certain processes when it comes to publication. I know some factors are usually considered at their level. If they want to, you mentioned the choice of the journal, of course, which has to be within the scope of the research that they're doing, and of course, it has to be relevant. But there are some other factors that people still consider when choosing a journal to publish. One, some people look at the article publication charge in terms of affordability. That's number one. Number two, they look at the frequency of publication. There are some journals that publish quarterly, some biannually, some, should I say, 6 times a year, like 6 volumes. And that's number three. And some, okay, I've mentioned the publication fee, the publication frequency, the, what do you call it now? What was the other point that I mentioned?
Amount.
Yeah, the amount, the fee. In your impact factor, thank you. I was trying to remember it. The impact factor. And these, the factors are interrelated, whereby you have some journals, the high impact factor sometimes do have high publication, APC. From your experience, what guidance will you give the young researcher in terms of how to approach? You remember, they still have that vibe. I want to publish. I want to push my paper out. I want to disseminate. And within those parameters, what advice would you give? Thank you. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you very much for the question. This actually will be covered this afternoon because, sorry, not this afternoon. I have to correct myself. It will be after the tea break. We're looking at an efficient publication strategy, and in that we look at various aspects. For instance, what is the objective of the specific article? What are the audiences that somebody's trying to get? We look at what are the benefits and the drawbacks of an impact factor journal, what one should take into consideration there, what are the benefits of the specialized journal versus a more general journal, etc. So if you're fine with it, I would like to keep that until after the tea break, because it's very much a core part of of an efficient publication strategy that that any researcher should develop for themselves for each article. In fact, not only in general, but for each article that they publish, to pose those same questions again. But I'll get to that after the tea break, if that's okay with you.
Okay, it's fine. We can do that after break. Let's take a break until 10:45. Tea break. Tea is outside. I think in front. I'm not sure where it is. Somewhere outside. Unfortunately, for those online, we can't give you tea. Okay, we'll come back 10:45. Then we'll start the second question. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Look forward to seeing you then. Thanks.
Thank you.
The mic.
Yeah, now it's good.
Online participants, do you hear us? Yes, Prof. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, but you must switch off the sound, eh? Because your online people outside will also hear double feedback.
Okay. Awesome. Please do the camera thing. There. Want to use that?
You want to use that?
Just please press on the camera and just.
Yeah.
It's already on.
Oh, it's already on. Okay.
Yeah.
It's fine. All right, it's fine. Thank you. So, Doc, you're fine.
I think we are okay. Dr. Fritz, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much.
What about giving the rights? Oh, it's fine still.
The rights to all that control thing. You see, now it's not. It was on Will's laptop.
Okay.
Because this thing control thing, it's now disabled on your laptop.
Okay.
Maybe because you are not the admin or something.
Okay.
Yeah, we can just leave it.
We can leave it.
Maybe we can try it before lunch.
So I think you're going to.
We are still. I'm projecting from
yes.
there.
Yes. So should I? Let me.
Remember, this is connected to this laptop. Yes. So we still use the same. Okay, everyone is back from tea break. Over to you, Dr. Fritz. We can continue.
Thanks, Dr. Dlamini. I hope everybody had a refreshing tea break. I do appreciate I'm throwing a lot of information at you, but don't worry, during the Q&As and especially the one-on-one sessions, we have the possibility to get back to everything. And also important to remember that after the retreat, all of the slides that you see here will be made available to you as a PDF, which you can look back later on. So there will be ample opportunities to get back to these points. We have now for the second part of today, we're going to be looking at two aspects. One of them is how to get to an efficient publication strategy, how to get your an idea of who you want to publish the article for, what the proper journal will be that will deliver you the audiences that you want. And then importantly, we also look at the very important steps that you have to follow prior to and during the period of submission and peer review, because unfortunately it doesn't stop with your article having been written and submitted to a journal and getting it accepted for publication. There are quite a few other steps there to do. I'm not sure we're going to be filling up the 2 hours that we have allotted, but nevertheless, on anything we can come back to that at a later point. Right at the beginning, I mentioned to you the objective of this retreat is not only about how to put a paper together, how to properly write a paper, but it's also about having impact in what you do, and also to get your paper as smoothly as possible through the review process, because a key part of what you want to achieve is that you want to have the gap between your research having been concluded, you having written your paper, and the paper getting published. You want that gap to be as short as possible, because you want to have impact in the field as quickly as possible. We have the next slide, please.
Just looks like it's frozen. Oh,
Yeah, there it goes. Thank you.
Very cool. Yeah.
Great.
Is it okay? Okay.
Yeah. You can still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Okay. You probably would have heard the saying before, publish or perish. Unfortunately, that is a saying that still applies today very much to any researcher, because as a researcher, if you, after your PhD, you're going to be working at a research institute at a university. As a young researcher, teaching is going to be a very key point of what you do. But you're also going to be doing research, and if you do research, it follows from that there is an obligation to publish one way or another. It depends a little bit how much you have to publish. That will depend on what the research component is of your work compared to the teaching component. But one way or another, you're going to be publishing. The perish part comes in that it has two meanings. The one is, if you don't publish, your career will perish, your career will die. But on the other hand, you can also publish and not get the desired impact out of that. So it is important to look at where are you going to be, where's the highest probability, where's the highest chance of you getting the impact that the research deserves. Which are the audiences you need to target, and for that you have to look at what the journal will deliver to you. Now, in the academic world, you will be confronted with the rules that your university itself, or if it's an independent research institute, that they will indicate to you where you have to publish, depending on the institute that you're working in or the country that you're working in. Usually some rules will apply in terms of sometimes it will state that the journal has to have an impact factor. If it has an impact factor, it may indicate to you what the bandwidth is of the impact factors. A number of countries have moved to look not so much at the impact factor of the journal, but more at the quartiles. The quartiles are if a journal has an impact factor, then it has at the same time a disciplinary ranking. So let's say, for argument's sake, you're publishing in a journal that mostly focuses on water resource management. That journal arguably could have a disciplinary ranking, which is, for instance, environmental sciences, or it could be water resources. And then if you look at the impact factors that are listed in there, depending on the percentage, will be in the first, second, third, or fourth quartile. A lot of universities now look at the quartiles and less so than the impact factor. But in the final analysis, it depends a little bit where you do your research, and what your employer will indicate where you have to publish. However, I'm mentioning all of this to make the following point, which is that you don't necessarily get the impact that you want or that your research would deserve by publishing in an impact factor journal, because an impact factor journal, by virtue, also has very specific audiences, and those might not be the audiences that you are looking at actually for your research. Could we go to the next slide, please? So one of the most important questions for deciding where you want to publish is to figure out who your target audiences is going to be. The researchers that you want to, or the readers that you want to reach with your research. Does the research have a very regional impact? Does it have applicability within a certain region? Or do you think the kind of research that you present, maybe because you present new methodology, or maybe the results that you publish can be applied in very different situations, not only in the regional context? In that case, you might want to consider a journal with a global footprint, a global readership. Next point is, are you targeting a very select group of researchers that fit only within the subject area or the research area that you're working in? Or could it be that the part of the research that you present would also be of interest to researchers who work in adjacent areas? Earlier on, I mentioned to you when we looked at the introduction of an article, I showed you the inverted triangle, where first of all you present from a broad context where your research fits in. As I mentioned there, that is the point when at which you can perhaps capture more audiences than you normally would. And ultimately, when we got to the discussion section, and we were talking about the applicability of the research, where in devising, in writing up your key messages about what you've done, there you also have to look at, are there perhaps audiences outside of an audience that looks very much like you do, a researcher in a very specific field? Are there other audiences who may find some of the work very valuable that you do? These could be people who work, professionals who work in industry. These could be policymakers at regional and national, local level. It could be educators. It could even be the general public, because remember, a lot of research that we publish, although the general public might not have access to the journal that you publish in, a lot of what we publish in journals that may have an impact or applicability beyond the audience that you are targeting. Journalists very frequently look at what we publish. We also promote a lot of the work that we publish to journalists, who then in a newspaper or in a magazine or in a business magazine or what have you, but in any event, a publication outside of academia, that the information might end up there as well. So it is good to look at what the different audiences are. I can mention to you one example of the general public having become quite interested in something. In one of our journals a few years ago, a very low-cost, low-tech solar panel, a very small one, was developed that is used in specifically in areas where there's no electricity after, for instance, a natural hazard or a hurricane or some kind of event where the infrastructure got damaged. And this very low-tech, very low-cost solar panel was used. It was targeted initially specifically for school children, so that they can have access to electricity while doing homework. In the end, it proved to be of great interest to a much wider range of audiences. The impromptu clinics that had to be set up used this, for instance, in a whole range of applications. So that article, although it was of interest, it was actually an article that focused on the production methods to keep this panel very low, the cost of that very low. In the end, the interest was much more on the applicability side, and within this article featured in a range of international newspapers, local newspapers. It ended up having being included in a documentary that was shown on different TV channels. So one doesn't necessarily set out to capture a very specific audience, but should keep in mind that whatever you do may be of interest to audiences beyond the people who identify same as you as a researcher. Next slide, please. So to recap on that, this is very much what you're looking at here. Do you have an audience that is worldwide? You do know that the research that you present here can be applied in a whole range of contexts in different countries. There's not only a regional component to that. For that, try and identify the best international journal that you can have that will deliver to you the worldwide audiences that you'd like. However, if what you are writing about has very specific regional applicability, even though it might have applicability elsewhere, but you do want the regional audiences first and foremost to know about what you do. Target that journal, because ultimately the impact of your research can be vastly greater than if you had gone to a journal with a global footprint where your local audiences may not have been reading that work that much. Next slide, please. The same as when you're looking at the audiences, again, you have to ask yourself when trying to identify a journal that is suitable to the work that you want to publish. For whom exactly is your research relevant? It could be that you write about a highly specialized topic that you know in terms of how you present the results, the kind of results that you're writing about, the kind of methodology. From that may follow that this is really for a highly specialized audience. It may be that that audience only fits within your field, that they are not adjacent disciplinary fields that would find it interesting what you're publishing or would be able to understand sufficient what you're publishing. In that case, it is good to target a very specialized journal. Because again, as I mentioned previously, the worldwide versus the regional audiences here, if you go to the specialized audience, you might end up getting a lot more impact in what you do than if you went for a general journal. However, it could be that a lot of the research that you present is very broad. It cuts across disciplinary boundaries. In that case, look at what a broader journal could offer you. This needn't be necessarily a multidisciplinary journal. It could be that in both of these cases, you're still looking at a field that is quite coherent. You mostly have people from the same discipline there, but it just could be that it is more broadly focused than what you look at for a specialized journal. Also, the difference between a specialized journal and a broad focused journal, if we can just briefly go back to the previous slide, I can show you one example of how in addition to audiences and the focus, if you can just go back to the previous slide, please. Here you can see, for instance, if you look at the top journal, Waste and Biomass Valorization, that happens to be a journal that I publish. If you in the field of valorization, so here valorization is very much about gaining value from waste streams and biomass. If a big part of your article is going to be on characterization, then this is a very good journal to publish in, because the acronym for the journal we use on top is WAVE. WAVE has, since its launch, been very clear in providing a platform for characterization studies. Of course, valorization needs to be a big part of such an article again, but in the submission guidelines, we make clear that characterization is quite key to what you have to do. However, if you look at the Korean Journal of Chemical Engineering, their characterization is actually not of interest. So if your article is going to contain a big component of characterization, the second journal is not going to be the one for you. It may deliver a different audience to you, but not in terms of what you're presenting in the journal. To the next slide again, please. Yes, and then in addition to that, then comes the question on what kind of access does a journal provide? Historically, there always was just one type of journal access, and that is you publish mostly for free in the journal, and a small number of journals might have a publication fee that they levy at the beginning. At Springer, we don't have journals like that anymore. By definition, if you submit an article, the submission process is entirely free. But then when the article is published, historically, the subscription model was the only model that you had. And that meant that an institution, the library, had to buy access to the journal. In olden times, that meant they got print copies. Some institutions still require print copies. Nowadays, most of the institutions will only get the online content. There you pay nothing for that to submit your article, but somebody wants to read the article, either has to get a subscription to the journal through the institute, a personal subscription, or they can do a pay-per-view where they pay only for access to one single article. A couple of years ago, about 20 years ago, open access became very important, and that means that an article is freely available to anyone right from the beginning that the article is published. However, open access is not free. For that, in the video, but I believe it was Dr. Ofolo who mentioned earlier when he asked me the question just before the break. What is called an APC, an article processing charge, is levied. So your article is accepted, and after acceptance, you have to decide, does your article go down the subscription route or down open access route? If it's open access, if it's subscription, there's no fee involved for you as an author. If it goes down the open access route, then there is an APC, an article processing charge payable to make the article permanently freely open access. Not all authors have to pay, because it could be that your institute has entered into either a compact or transformative agreement with Springer Nature, and that means your institute will have a set number of articles a year that will be published for free. It is important to note that for a transformative agreement, an institute will decide which are the article types that can be published for free under that arrangement, under that agreement. Mostly, it will only be original research articles, meaning the article type that is most prevalent in academic publishing. It could be a review article. In some cases, an institute will agree that book reviews are published, but then that depends a little bit on the discipline, because within humanities and social sciences, book reviews still get published quite a lot. In most other disciplines that won't, so one has to check that a little bit. But if you, for instance, publish a commentary to an article, that usually won't be covered in the compact agreements. That's not so much a decision on the publisher side, but that's very much a decision on the institute who enter into a transformative or compact agreement, what they decide would be eligible under the agreement. So when you write an article, do check if your institute is part of such an agreement. Do check beforehand what are the article types that are eligible under that. But this is a very important point to check, because increasingly now in the research funding that you might get, you may see that a part of the research funding is earmarked so that you can publish your article in an open access journal. It could also be that your institute require you even that the funding would not only say this is the amount that you can use for open access. Increasingly, you see that certain types of funding will say a certain proportion of your research outputs have to be published as open access, and that drives you a little bit towards selecting very specific journals where you look at does the journal allow open access or not. What is also very important to mention, you have two, broadly speaking, you have two journal types. For the subscription journals, you see that most of the subscription journals will also be called hybrid journals. And in a hybrid journal, you can publish both for freely, or you can opt for open access. So there will be a mix of subscription-based articles, meaning articles that are behind the paywall, or they also can be open access articles in there, or a journal will be fully open access. a lot of journals that used to be subscription based now are moving towards fully open access. If you look 2, 5, 10 years from now, you'll see that the number of open access, fully open access journals versus subscription or hybrid journals will be increasing, because open access really is very much what the future of academic publishing also will look like. The next slide, please. What is incredibly important when you look at open access journals is to check very much what this journal is all about. You may have heard the term rogue or predatory journals. These are journals that are published with the sole objective of the publishing house creating revenue for themselves. They will, for instance, offer you extremely speedy review processes. Some of these journals might go with a review process that'll last only a week. Now, having spent decades in publishing, I can guarantee you that if you look at a turnaround of a review process of 4 or 5 days, that leads to an immediate acceptance and then publication, that can't be a reputable journal, because a review process in itself takes time. So if you are in the process of identifying your journal, an open access journal, it is very important to go through a very rigorous process of checking whether this is a valid journal, whether this is a reputable journal, what they publish in there and how. The first point is to clear for yourself that this actually is a reputable publisher. Do they have a long history of publishing? If they have a short history of publishing, what have they been doing ever since the publishing house got launched? If you look at the major academic publishers that have been around for a very long time, I mentioned a couple of here, Springer Nature, Elsevier, Wiley, PLOS, Taylor and Francis. I can add some of the very reputable academic, university academic presses. All of those, you know, that they bear the hallmarks of what is a reputable publisher, and if you submit your article there, it will go through a process of peer review that adheres to all the rules of peer review, etc. So that's step one. The second point is, if you see a journal and you're not familiar with the journal, you're not familiar with the publisher, go and check whether that journal is, and other journals of that publisher, whether it's indexed in the most important reputable databases. Those databases could shift a little bit depending on your field, but they're also the broad ones such as Web of Science, Scopus, Medline, etc. And all of that, you do need to find not necessarily all of the journals of a publisher in there, but you should find a certain number in there. A very important point is that some of the fully open access journals will ask you at the point of submission, they will say the article processing charge for open access is X amount, you need to pay it now. That is one of the biggest reasons you should immediately go to another journal. We're not talking about a small processing fee that some journals levy. I mentioned to you earlier at Spring, we don't have those journals anymore, but there still are very reputable journals that historically had the habit of asking you to pay a small processing fee. That is really they use that to cover part of the review process costs, etc. But increasingly that is becoming very, very uncommon now. But the most important point here is if the processing fee approaches the article article publishing charge, then you know by definition this is a predatory or a rogue journal. And then finally, look at the editorial board. Do a Google search on the people you see there. You may not know everybody there, but if you cannot find good profiles of the editorial board members, if you can't find the research back on ResearchGate, they don't have all good profiles, that could be a reason that these are not legitimate people at all in a journal. And next slide, please. But there are further online tools where you can also go and check what is a valid journal, what is a valid publisher. At the bottom here, you see the link, thinkchecksubmit.org. That is a website that is run a little bit independently of a lot of publishers, but you find a lot of extremely valuable information here that allow you to check what is the publishing house all about, what is the journal all about, and it helps you in creating to a level of trust about the fact that you are working with a credible publisher. And next slide, please. So when you go to the site, you will find for journals, you'll find a quite a lengthy checklist in there. Our advice is if you can answer yes to most or all of the questions on the list, then you're fine. Then you have the confidence of knowing that the journal you want to submit to is a valid journal. In addition to that, you also have what is called the DOAJ. That is a database of open access journals that is publicly available online as well. You can go to that, or sorry, database. It's allow me to correct myself. It is the directory of open access journals, and all valid open access journals that, if you would perform this checklist, and you get substantially all the questions answered as yes, or all of the questions. In such a case, a journal would appear in the DOAJ. If not, it won't appear there. So you have great confidence by looking at the DOAJ that these are verified journals where you can submit your journal to. Okay, so you have a next slide, please. So the next point is you have identified your journal. You're confident that this is the right journal that you can submit to. You've worked through the entire process of structuring your manuscript according to the broad rules that I gave at the beginning. Remember the IMRAD acronym, sorry, that defines what the structure is. You've also looked very much at what the audiences are, and you're ready to submit your work at this point. However, there's still a fair bit of work to be done. Here we're going to be looking at two things. How do you present your research? Because your article will have to speak for itself, but before that, you also have to present a little bit your article to the journal you're going to be submitting to. And then importantly, I'm going to come back to the fact that you, again, have to look very much clearly at what the journal itself tells you what to do. So next slide, please. With your article substantially ready, what you then have to set out to do, you know what the journal is you want to submit to, but you now have to set about writing a very short cover letter. The cover letter is a little bit an advertisement for what you're going to be doing. I mentioned at the very beginning, for instance, the importance of a title. Same as the analogy that I used is you walk into a room of people you hadn't met before, and first impressions always count. This also applies very much to the cover letter that you're going to be writing. In that, two very important things that you do. First of all, you introduce the significance and the relevance of your study. That is sketched at length in your article. But in the cover letter, you have to present it again very concisely. I mentioned earlier the value point that you present in your article to show why it is the research is relevant, why the results are relevant, the applicability. You touch upon that here. And then the second important point is you show that your article is actually suitable to be published by the journal. For that, you have to have a very good view on every journal shows the aims and scope of what a journal is all about on their website. Read very carefully through the aims and scope because when you sketch why your article is suitable to be published by the journal you're going to be submitting to, it is good to couch the relevance of your article within the context of the aims and scope. That is how you present how you sketch the suitability of your research to the journal and by extension to the audiences of the journal. Next slide, please. I've mentioned this a couple of times already, but it is something that really bears repeated mention again, and that is it is very important when identifying a journal to also go and look at the submission, what is called either the submission guidelines or the author guidelines, to look at various things there. Importantly, editorial policies. You've written already your article. You're familiar with the journal. You have a good idea of what the audiences are, but it is important to go and look at the editorial policies as well, because here quite a wealth of information is given on how the journal operates. You will see on the right hand side there's one link, a big, for instance, on authorship. What we see quite a lot is that during the process of review, for instance, we sometimes get authors come back and say, well, I forgot to add somebody now that we thought about it, now that we discussed it again. I forgot to add an author. Can we do that now? A lot of journals will tell you, I'm very sorry, we were very clear in the submission guidelines. All of that needs to be clarified right at the beginning, and we only can do that in exceptional cases. So all of the points that you read in the author guidelines work very clearly through that, because ultimately there you get the picture of what is the expectations of an editor-in-chief, what they're going to look at. Previously, I also mentioned to you that there are many aspects outside of the value of what you present. So you can present an article that is very well written, the results are very credible, your methodology was very well done, etc., etc. But you miss a small technical point that was sketched to you in the author guidelines or the submission guidelines. Professor Dlamini asked me previously about the difference. She cited that the Nature journals, for instance, on the discussion results have a very different way of doing that in other journals. Again, it's very important to look at aspects like that, to familiarize yourself sufficiently to know that you also meet the technical requirements that is sketched for you in here. So that you don't submit what is a very good article that does fit within the aims and scope of a journal that likely would have been accepted for review, but an editor looks at something and says, well, you missed a major, what for them is a major point, what for you might have looked like a minor point. The reference style that you use is completely in contradiction to what was very explicitly sketched to you in the author guidelines, and therefore your article is rejected for review. Bear in mind that given very high volumes of submissions to journals, an editor-in-chief may actually not take the time to say, you've picked the wrong reference style. The discussion and results section should have been done differently. All of these things sometimes can take half an hour or an hour to remedy. But the editor-in-chief may not necessarily point out to you that the article is rejected due to a very small, a very minor technical point. You won't know what the reason is, but it will be a big loss to you. So it's very important to look at this very clearly. Right at the beginning of my presentation, I also talked about that when you submit an article to a journal, you immediately are submitting it, in fact, to multiple audiences. The one is going to be the readership, if your article is accepted and published. But way before then, there are two key audiences that you will have to convince that the article is robust, that it is scientifically sound, that you have results that are worth spreading to a number of audiences. And that will be the editor-in-chief, who does a check of figuring out, does it fit within the aims and scope? And if it fits within the aims and scope, does it follow the procedure that we set out for how an article should be formatted? And then finally, also, is it scientifically sound? It is unfortunately a very sad fact of the life of an editor-in-chief that a very high number of articles will be rejected, not because it's scientifically unsound, but because it doesn't meet minor technical aspects. So you may think I'm hammering endlessly away on this, but really it is a point that is very important to follow in what you do. The next slide, please. While assessing a journal, it is important also then to familiarize yourself with what has been published in the journal so far. If you publish an article that is on a topic that when you do a search, either in a journal or you do it in Scholar or Scopus or Web of Science, what have you, and you realize that this has been done endlessly, then the novelty aspect of the article will, of course, be questioned greatly. So it is important to go and look at a journal that you have in mind, and to get a picture for yourself to find out how much of the research has been published that you're presenting in this journal. If an enormous amount of research on that topic has already been published, you have to ask yourself, is the novelty aspect sufficient in the journal, in the article that you publish? If very little or nothing has been published, it could mean one or two things. It could mean that your work really is extremely novel and it will be of interest, but it also could be that the kind of work that you publish is in fact not of interest to the journal. So once again, do a search to see how much on this topic has been published in the journal, and also mirror that with looking at aims and scope to figure out if you don't see a lot of research in this journal on this topic, but if you do see it reflected in the aims and scope, it could be that it is in fact of interest. But the novelty aspect here is the one that I'm emphasizing. So let's go and look at what the structure is for what must be included in the cover letter. Could we have the next slide, please? And here we hark back a little bit to the questions we had at the beginning. It's going to be a little bit talked earlier about the abstract, where I said the abstract is a little bit like a mini article. The cover letter is going to be much more condensed version of that. When I started talking about cover letters, I did mention it needs to be very concise. It needs to be very focused on what you do. It can't be long. So first of all, introduce your manuscript right at the beginning. You state the manuscript title, and if relevant, sketch what the article type is. If you had written a review article, but in the title it is not immediately evident, do sketch that it is in fact a review article or a brief communication or what have you. It depends also a little bit on the journal itself. A lot of journals in their submission guidelines will sketch to these are the article types that we accept. And just as an example, it may, for instance, say original research articles, review articles, brief communication, and perhaps something else. So do check that your article fits one of them if you think it is important to sketch that at the beginning. A lot of journals will publish in the main original research only, in which case it's not so important to sketch that, to highlight it here. Secondly, you need to show what the scope of your study is, because that ties very much in with the aims and scope of the journal. You need to make the connection a little bit there. A brief background to why you undertook the study, and a very, very brief sketch on your research problem and the aims that you had set out for yourself in the research question. The third point is to sketch your achievements. Here you go into very briefly into the study design and mention 2 or 3 key findings only. If more key findings come out, really ask yourself whether it's relevant to discuss all of them here, because once again, you have very limited space in the cover letter to grab the attention. The longer your cover letter, the more detailed your cover letter, the less likely an editor-in-chief is going to read through all of it. So here you need to be very concise in terms of what you're presenting. Then moving on to the study relevance that you want to establish. In the previous part, you sketched why your research was appropriate for this journal. Now you're going to indicate why your research is valuable or applicable for the readership of the journal. And in that part, you can focus on 2 things, the conclusion and importantly also the implications for the field. Implications for the field I've mentioned several times already, where you'll cover that both in your conclusion, but you'll also do that in the abstract again. Again, here is a valuable opportunity to have, together with a key message that you had in the previous section when you're talking about 2 or 3 key findings. Here you're going to tie in those findings to the applicability in the field. Could, for instance, be that you also set out that what you've established now lays the basis for valuable further research, and you tie that then into the to the readership of the journal again. And finally, if there are any other information outside of the article that you need to convey, if you could, for instance, mention here something about if it belonged to a very specific research project that you think is relevant for the editor-in-chief to know about. You can mention that here. Some journals will ask you during the submission process that you also may want to mention whether a certain reviewer should be excluded. Those could be, for instance, people who have a conflict of interest. It could be that somebody who gave you great guidance on this, but is not the guidance could have been given on the study design, on how you approach your methodology, could have been a mentor to you in how to put together your results. That person would present a conflict of interest if that person were to review the article. So you may want to mention the names of people who should not be approached for that. So once you've done all of this, you're ready. Let's move to the next slide, and then I show you, broadly speaking, what the process is that your manuscript will take throughout its journey from submission, hopefully, to a final decision. Could we have the next slide, please? So working from the left, you're done with your manuscript. You are submitting the manuscript now to the journal of your choice after you've made a good selection of the scope of the journal, the readership that the journal will offer to you. It gets to an editor-in-chief. There's a triage that usually takes place, and the triage consists of checking, does the article actually fit the aims and scope of the journal? If it does, is it scientifically robust enough? Is this the kind of research that we are confident is at a sufficient level, not necessarily for publication at this point? Here the question mostly is now, is the research robust enough after having established that it meets the aims and scope of the journal to put it into review? If the answer is yes, then it is either directly reviewers will be invited to review the paper, or the paper is passed on to either an associate editor or handling editor, who then manages the entire review process. And the associate editor or the handling editor will be the person in charge of inviting reviewers. The reviews come back, an assessment is made on that, and then usually that handling editor or associate editor will then make a recommendation on acceptance, rejection, paper should be revised, etc., etc. But we're not there yet. So reviewers are then invited for the paper. It gets sent out to them. They have a certain period in which to review the paper, and they make a recommendation. Again, what I mentioned earlier, the recommendation will be acceptance or rejection, and it will be major or minor revisions. That recommendation goes back to the handling editor. The handling editor then passes that again to the editor-in-chief. Mostly in majority of journals, the editor-in-chief is the person to take the final decision. They make, based on the recommendations, one and decide whether a paper is or whether it's returned to the authors to go through a revised version, and the review process starts again. Could we go to the next slide, please? So let's assume your paper, when it was submitted, was accepted by the editor-in-chief for review. That means, first of all, the check was done. Does it fit the aims and scope of the journal? Yes, it does. Second is it scientifically robust enough? Does the editor-in-chief have sufficient confidence to say that this reasonably could be thought of as passing peer review? If the answer is it's reasonably accepted that it may pass peer review, it will be sent to peer reviews. But before that, very importantly, and that's why I hammered a couple of times again on what may seem like a minor point, but is actually as equally important as fitting the aims and scope of a journal and scientifically robust enough. The last point is, technically, does it meet all requirements of the journal? You will tire of me mentioning the same points again and again, but honestly, as often as a paper is regarded as out of scope for a journal, it's scientifically it's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't fit the aims and scope of the journal, or that it fits the aims and scope of a journal, but it's not robust enough. Or it could be, the last point is, the reasons are on par with, let me rephrase that, a manuscript being rejected for review due to technical aspects, that is on a par with not in scope and not scientifically robust enough. So by no means is the technical aspect assessment by an editor-in-chief of lesser importance when looking at whether a paper is going to be accepted for review. But your paper has now been accepted for review, and now you go through what is arguably also a very daunting process for especially somebody who's not published a paper before. Next slide, please. Important to emphasize, though, is that it is a daunting process, but it is to the greater extent, actually quite a positive process. The entire point of peer review is to check whether the whole of what you present is valid. At the beginning, I mentioned the literature review is going to demonstrate to both the editor-in-chief, to reviewers, and to readers that you are an expert in the field. That you know what is the state of art of research that had gone before yours, because that sets the tone and that sets the context in which you devised your research question. Then the next thing that's being checked is that the methodology that you either decided to use or that you maybe developed for this is robust. That is sufficient grounds for believing that the results that you then generated from that was done with a methodology that is credible, and then finally with the results and the discussion and the conclusion that it all fits together. The idea of the review process is to check all of that, but then also, very importantly, as is mentioned at the top, to help you get a view on how you can improve your study. To that point, it may mean that reviewers will actually say to you, well, I want you to run a certain data set again. I want you to expand on this. This part I don't find incredibly relevant, but another part that is a little bit minor in your paper needs to be explained a lot more or in a different way in order for us to understand why that part of the methodology was done, how you came to those results. So it can be quite a laborious process. It may mean, especially if you get back major revisions, it may mean that you have to run a part of your research again, or at least to redefine what you've done. In addition to helping you improve what you've done, it could be that the focus is very much on improving the research that you did, or it just could be improving the manuscript. There could be advice on restructure the manuscript, explain this differently. Your abstract misses the point entirely. Your discussion section is to brief on this, elaborate on this, elaborate on that. So it may not involve redoing research, but just redoing the writing process of the paper. Another extremely important part of the peer review process is also to ensure that only relevant studies are published. If you did research on which in the last 2 years 5,000 papers got published, a reviewer might take the point of view that it adds absolutely nothing to that. There's no novelty. I mentioned quite a few times before, very little of what gets published in the many thousands of journals that are published around the world, very little of that will take the field forward in leaps and bounds. The vast majority of what gets published will take the field forward only very incrementally. But still, the peer review process needs to establish that incremental change is sufficient to accept something for publication. If you publish a topic that's been done endlessly but doesn't add anything in terms of novelty, it probably won't go through the review process in a successful manner. And that ties in also the bit about incrementality is that peer review is very much designed to advance the field. to help it go forward, and not only to add yet another paper that doesn't tell you anything, that is robust, the methodology was good, you do know how to present your results, but it didn't actually add any knowledge to the field. It's also meant to sift out papers very much like that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So you get back the first response from an editor-in-chief, and the editor-in-chief will then, in that, or the handling editor maybe, will pass on to you the comments made by the peer reviewers. In that, they will clearly say what needs to be changed, what they didn't understand. They might pose questions to you. What is very important is to read through that extremely carefully, and then set about writing a short response letter. Same as with a cover letter. Key here is to be concise, to the point, don't beat around the bush, but really focus on what was asked of you, and then get back to within that to exactly what you should be responding to. So most of the cases, the recommendation will be for major revisions. You get a long list of review comments and what needs to be revised. So one by one, work through that and briefly state what exactly did you revise and how. When you get the online version back from the journal, you'll see that in the left margin, from the top right through the entire article, every line will be mentioned. It's important to mention in your revision so that both a reviewer and an editor can very easily track what you've changed for every change that you make, to refer directly to the page and to the line numbers that you have in there. Different journals will ask you to submit a revised version in a different way. The majority of journals will ask you to provide a revised manuscript that highlights the revised text. Quite often this can be done as track changes, but depending on the journal, it could be asked in a different way. So once again, it's very important, if it's not going to be clearly stated in the recommendation letter that is sent to you, or the decision letter that's sent to you, to quickly look back at the submission guidelines and check, is guidance given on how to provide the revised version. If not, then it's safe to just follow this, where you highlight the revised text and or you track changes. Next slide, please. Now, well, I expected to hear that sound, because the thing is, especially as a young researcher, you will realize that the peer review process is something that can be very confrontational. Very often it is felt that this is a very personalized thing that was sent to you, that actually isn't quite the case. But the first time, I think anybody in the room who's had papers published will attest to you that the first time was a bit of a wake-up process, where you may get very direct comments about the research. A lot of reviewers really don't beat about the bush, unfortunately, and are not particularly sensitive in their writing, and might write back to you to say this abstract is useless. It misses the point. I don't see what you're doing here. Change it or lose out on the process. So these are things you really have to be prepared for, that you may get also from editors very direct comments that may feel like they're touching upon the integrity of you as a researcher, I would say to that, it is good to develop a thick skin from the beginning, because it is the peer review process is a daunting process. Remember, a lot of people want to publish in the journal. If you look at the rejection rates of journals, you'll see that the more important the journal, the higher rejection rate. It is not uncommon for many journals to reject up to 95% of the paper submitted to them. So a lot of people are trying to publish in the journal, and when few articles are accepted for review, they are really put through their paces. However, there also is a line that in the guidance that we give as publishers and as editors to reviewers, we also indicate to them what they can and cannot do. We give very clear guidance to reviewers to say that comments made by them should be supportive, descriptive. It can be critical, but ultimately it's about improving the quality of the paper, and the language they use and the tone they use should be kept in mind. So when you do get back extremely what you might regard as very controversial comments from a reviewer, take a step back, discuss that with colleagues, show them what you got, ask them their experiences on the review process of the articles they themselves had published, so that they can figure out, so that you can figure out with their help whether a boundary was crossed in this in terms of the comments. Look also at the journal articles that were published. In some cases, some journals have an open review process whereby a published article will show the review comments as well. That is a little bit uncommon. Most journals don't work that way, but it is important to do that. And but the important point here is very much work through all of that to see whether isn't in fact, no matter the fact that it may look like a very controversial, confrontational comment, whether there isn't in fact value to the comments that were made. However, and could we have the next slide, please? In some cases, it could be that you look at the comments and that also, colleagues, or it could be your supervisor, could be your mentor, would indicate that some of the comments are not appropriate. Some of the comments don't actually support what is being asked by a reviewer. Sometimes we do see that reviewers really at great haste would work through the review process, and that you have a feeling that they may not have understood what you're trying to do. It could be that on your side, the description wasn't that good, and that led to them not really understanding what it was all about. But it just could be that you also look at something and say, this is out of bounds for what a review process should be. It is unfair, it's unprofessional. And very importantly, one of the guidances that we give to reviewers, and this applies to all journals, not only Springer journals, it applies to across academic publishing. When a reviewer suggests articles to be cited, they look at your literature review and they realize, well, you may have missed here and there quite an important reference, and they suggest that you add some references. It's very important to go and look who are the authors of these references. Now, the guidance that we give to reviewers is that you, in principle, are not allowed to suggest to an author of a paper that you're reviewing to cite papers that you authored or co-authored. It could be that the reviewer suggests a paper that they themselves had authored or co-authored that is relevant to what you're doing. Most journals, the handling editor or the editor-in-chief will look at those comments and then write to you to say you're under no obligation to cite any of these papers. Sometimes they will forget to do that or just miss out on that. As a general rule, if a reviewer suggests to cite any papers that they had authored or co-authored, as a general rule, regardless of the publisher, you can safely disregard that completely. Do look at the papers. It could be that some of the papers support exactly what you're doing, but on the whole, we do regard that as a little bit unethical not a little bit, I'm being euphemistic now. It is unethical for reviewers to suggest their own papers. So this could also be something that you may want to look at. And if in doubt about the validity of comments, you think a review may have misunderstood, you think they may be unfair, they may be unprofessional, you may be concerned about the papers that they had suggested of their own to be reviewed, do contact the editor when very doubtful about that, because that's a very good way of figuring out what the next steps could be. However, it could be that you actually get to the point where after review, the recommendation by the reviewers would be that the paper should be rejected, and it could then be that the editor-in-chief or the handling editor would agree that based on the reviews, there's not sufficient basis to have confidence that the paper should be published, and therefore your paper will be rejected. So could we go to the next slide, please? And the next one, please. If the journal that you submitted to was a Springer Nature journal, what happens in that case if your paper was rejected? Now remember, it can be rejected. It can be what we call desk rejected. Desk rejected means at the point of submission, the journal editor looks at the paper and they realize it's either out of scope or there's some technical aspects that don't fit. And then they will reject the paper that will be sent to the transfer desk. If it is scientifically completely invalid, if it's not a scientifically robust paper, it won't be sent to the transfer desk. But in all other cases, if it's a desk rejection and there's no problems about the scientific quality, or if it had gone through review and it was then rejected, then your paper will be sent to the Springer Nature transfer desk. And there we have topical experts who help you in trying to figure out, is there another journal within the Springer Nature journal portfolio? And remember, as I said at the beginning, we have almost 3,000 journals that we publish in total. They help you in trying to find another journal that may be suitable for what you want to do. And just the next slide, please. Here you see a cascade model that we for instance have. Sometimes you go from a very specialized journal, and that will a journal that will look at the work and think, well, it doesn't really fit what we do. It's a very good article, but it doesn't fit what we do. But we have some broad focus journals and could go there. It can also go the other way around, where a journal is a very broad journal, but they realize this is so specific. The audiences that you really need are better found in a very specialized journal. And then that is what you go there. And that, a little bit ahead of time, actually brings us to the end of this section that helps you figure out what is an efficient publication strategy and how to conceive of the different journals and the different audiences that you might get based on the very specific journal. So much ahead of time, as I just said, but I hope that you got some good pointers, some good tips and tricks here as well on not only the fact that it is highly important to put together a paper that follows a very specific structure that cuts across all of academia, regardless of the discipline that you're working in, that not only is the point that you have to follow very clearly the guidelines of journal to figure out how does journal expect you to put an article together, what are the technical aspects you should be looking at, but then importantly also, what are the aspects that you have to look at in terms of where are you going to get the impact that you want? Is it going to be in a highly specialized journal? Is it going to be in a broader focus journal? Is the audience that you're trying to capture, is that a global audience, or would the impact that you're trying to achieve be done much better if you are focusing on a local journal? Then also the aspect of fully open access journals, that you have a very high level of confidence that the publishing house that you are aiming for a specific journal is a completely valid publishing house that works according to the academic rigors that we expect all publishing houses in academia to work in. I then took you through the peer review process, the many aspects that you have to figure out or bear in mind there, and then we ended up with, well, either your article has been accepted for review and going through that, or it's been rejected. And then tomorrow, we will recap all of this, but tomorrow we'll also be focusing very importantly on some other aspects that quite often are not considered very important, but increasingly are in fact very important. One is on publishing ethics. There are many pitfalls, especially for young researchers, if they haven't gone through the process of publishing a number of articles, that they have to keep in mind. And then importantly, we will also be looking then at how to promote your publication. The fact that your journey as an author hasn't ended when your article is published, that there's more work to be done and more benefits that can be had for creating bigger impact at that point. We're a little bit ahead of when the Q&A starts, but I'm ready for that. If you actually, I just noticed, sorry, I've checked the program. The Q&A actually starts after the lunch, but if you already want now, if Dr. Dlamini and Professor Moalafhi agree, we can already start on Q&As now, or we can wait till after the lunch, whatever is their choice.
Thank you so much. I think we had indicated before tea break that Q&A can come now after your lecture. So I think we can just ask questions before we go for lunch. Any question online? Any questions? Any comments? Anything you would want to share, your experience in the publication?
I'm not sure if you can hear me. Sorry. Check.
Okay, before Dlamini come in, I had bad experience some time back. I wanted to I submitted an article in Springer Nature or something like that. And then within a week, it was rejected. So I was wondering, because there was no reason, that was provided why it was rejected. But somehow now I think after this lecture today, probably it could be those small things of not reading the guidelines, the authors. Yeah, Dlamini, please come through.
Mine? Come closer.
You can talk, I think, from there.
It's off. I'm still doing like.
Yeah, maybe before she comes in, Dr. Fritz, the facilitator for today is Dr. Mabuku. I can see that the name, we didn't get the name.
Okay.
No, indeed, I'm sorry. I kept on referring to Dr. Dlamini, but I see very small figures on my screen, and no names. So I do apologize. I very much apologize. To the point you made now, I really regret to hear that you didn't get a reason, a sufficient reason why it was done. I publish 19 journals on myself, and one thing that I constantly work with editorial boards is to say that as important as it is when an author gets reviewer comments to explain in detail what needs to be changed, as important as that is when somebody gets a desk rejection. You cannot simply issue a desk rejection and not provide reasons, because you leave an author adrift at sea. I mentioned the triage that the editor-in-chief does, and the triage is, first of all, does it fit the aims and scope of the journal? By the way, if it's noisy on my end, I apologize. There's construction taking place outside of where I am, and I think they'll leave within a few minutes. So apologies if it's very noisy. So to get back the triage process, first of all, is it within the aims and scope of the journal? Secondly, is it scientifically robust? Thirdly, does it meet the technical requirements of the journal? Any of those could be a reason, or a mix of those could be a reason. But if you don't tell an author what the reasons are, in my view, you potentially set them up for failure when they submit to the next journal, because if that journal has the same technical requirements, and you again miss what the technical requirement is, but you don't know which one it is, again your article is rejected. So the second time round, you're going to be wondering, is it most authors will immediately think scientifically it's not good enough, because that's the default place that authors go to when they get rejections. So it is really regrettable that you don't get a description on that, and that is something that I work throughout my career. I've worked with editors-in-chief to say, as important as the review comments, if it goes into review, if it's a desk rejection, give clear reasons why, because otherwise an author is completely lost on what it is. But given the volume of what journals, this is not an excuse, it's only a description. Given the volume of papers that many journals get, it becomes absolutely impossible to work through every paper and give reasons. Still, it's as I said, it's a description and not an excuse, because it is expected of every journal to give a very clear reason why a desk rejection takes place. When you will see that when a paper has been put through a review and it's rejected, then usually a clear description will be given why. Unfortunately, it is not done at the point of desk rejection only.
Okay, Dr. Fritz, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, what I wanted to ask is that, okay, let's say, for example, you now get feedback, you get feedback from the publishers, and then now you say you have the comments, then when you prepare the table, a response table. What if now I realize that there's something new that I want to add? Is that allowed?
Can you give me an example of what you want to add?
Say, for example, I realized that I would like to improve. Say there were no comments on the methods from the reviewers in the first when I submitted, when I got the comments back. But as I read through the paper, I discovered that I could actually improve on the methods, or I realized that I could actually improve on the methods. But there were no comments from the reviewers on my methods. But now I want to add them now. Is that allowed?
I would say in general that would be allowed, but if it is, a lot of journals may take the position to say that, well, if it's a clarification, you describe it a little bit better, you expand a little bit better so that the reader has a deep understanding of what the methodology was about, that's fine. But if it comes across as an omission that should have been there from the beginning, that could be a reason where an editor-in-chief or a reviewer says, well, the omission leads me to think that I wasn't given a clear enough understanding of what happened and why do you discover this late in the process. So I think clarification or expansion that might lead to better understanding, in principle, that will be fine. But I would very clearly indicate that to in your response letter that this was done and for what reason.
Thank you.
But once again, it depends very much on the journal, because I can think of a number of my journals where that would be fine, and I can think of a couple of my journals where the view would be it casts doubt on the rigor if you do it now, unless it's explained very well. Just to say that, well, for instance, it's just an expansion, just a clarification, just, you know, the context is sketched a little bit better.
Prof Moalafhi.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Fritz. Before I pose my question, there was a perspective from Prof Aufulu in terms of publication fees, publication frequency, impact factor, as factors that sometimes determine where you take your journal, so where you take your manuscript. So from my point, I think they were covered. I don't know if maybe Prof Aufulu would like to make some follow-up, but also maybe he wanted to bring to the context so that we all appreciate them. I hope you were addressed, maybe, Prof. But passing, we have other challenges. Sometimes you submit your paper and then it is rejected. And in that case, like now, it's put into databases like Google Scholar. People can easily access it. And when you try to take it to another journal, so it's like it's already published or in the public domains. These are some of the challenges that we have. And I would like to know, I know that Springer Nature, it's a high-level publisher. Do you also sometimes encounter those problems? What are the quality assurances to safeguard against that? What would you say about other journals? And then the second, or the extension of the question, which is related, is to do with sometimes, especially for PhD students, sometimes they are a little bit uncomfortable in sending their work to conferences. Because sometimes once it's in the conference, sometimes again it's available. From there now you need a journal paper, because part of their requirements also is to publish indexed journal papers, which is a challenge. I will give credit to our regional waternet. That's the best facilitated symposium and platform for students showcasing their work. They submit their abstracts, and those are facilitated to ultimately be published as index journal papers. Maybe the only one I know in which you submit, even if it's a conference paper, you know that you wouldn't have challenges to say this is already published. So from the journals under your portfolio, under Springer Nature as a publisher, how do you handle the issue of conferences or symposiums, and then making sure that these can be developed into journal papers? Thank you.
On the latter point, I think you're referring here to conference proceedings, and that differs very much from one conference to the next. A number of conferences would, when you submit an abstract, they will indicate that if you accept it, the abstract will be published. Either the abstract will be published, or a mini version of your paper, a 1 to 2 page version, for instance, will be published as a conference proceeding. A lot of conferences will do that as a mandatory part. When you submit to the conference, and the problem is a lot of conferences don't necessarily sketch that very clearly. But for a lot of conferences, that's simply part and parcel of what you do. Your abstract or a mini version of the paper is accepted, and it will be published as a conference proceedings. Having a conference proceedings publication does not necessarily exclude that paper from an expanded version of that paper being published in a regular journal. Most journals have actually now moved away from doing both regular articles and conference proceedings. Most of the publishers now make a distinction to say that we will publish conference proceedings, but not in a journal. You do get exceptions still. The idea being that the two things are quite different. The purpose of a conference proceedings is that somebody can have in one go an overview of everything that got presented at the meeting. But this is not the full version. In fact, the full version may not necessarily even have been presented at the conference. And for that reason, conference proceedings, but it is important to look at the journal that you're submitting to. On the whole, having a conference proceedings of your article does not necessarily exclude you or prevent you from publishing a full version of the paper. It is important, though, to cite in the full version that you're going to publish to make mention of the fact that this builds on a previous version that was published at in a conference proceedings, or it follows a shorter version that was presented at a conference, because the important thing about research is that the entire academic record should always stay intact. And that actually brings me to the first point that you made. And that touches actually on preprints. Now, preprints have been around a very long time. In fact, surprisingly, the first preprint, or I should say a precursor to a preprint, actually dates back to 1961. When, so just out of interest, I'll quickly mention that the NIH in the US, the National Institute for Health, the federal funded body that does the largest proportion of federal funding on medicine and health go through the NIH. And the NIH started in 1961 to share working papers. And at that point, obviously, this is before internet, these things were sent to tens of thousands of people around the world in printed format. So obviously the cycle of getting something like that, making a comment, sending it back and getting another version might take a very long time. Now online, it goes much further. But fast forward to where we now, the last couple of years, we've seen a huge growth in preprints across all disciplines. Some disciplines were very advanced in that, but you now see that it's used pretty much across all disciplines. The vast majority of journals will not have any prohibition on the fact that you had a preprint before you submit that to a journal. To indicate how prevalent preprints have become, you've seen all the preprint repositories. Very well known one of them is called Research Square, and Research Square actually, since a couple of years now, is fully owned by Springer, and it was integrated into the whole submission process for all Springer Nature journals. So when you submit an article to a Springer journal, you will, for the majority of them, will be asked, would you like to publish your this as a preprint as well? It's not mandatory. It is a free and voluntary service. But if you say yes, it goes onto the preprint server of Research Square. Now, the important thing to remember about preprints, and this is not a Springer Nature rule, this is how it works across academia. And once again, I mentioned earlier, the integrity of the academic record should be kept intact. Once you post a preprint to whatever repository, whether it's Research Square to archive to one of the many preprint servers that you have, it cannot be removed unless it meets very, very specific rules. For instance, if plagiarism was detected in that, and a number of extremely serious ethical cases, if any of those points cannot be addressed by posting a revised version. For instance, you post a preprint, you did an article together with a couple of authors, you post a preprint, and then one author comes back and says, I was not part of research, my name was erroneously added. What you can do there is you can post a revised version showing the new authorship, but that is never retracted. So in very, very few cases, plagiarism is actually the most important one. There it can be, a preprint can be retracted. For the rest, preprints never are taken off a server in order to keep the integrity of the academic record intact. Now, so you post a preprint, and then the article goes to a journal that you submitted to. If they decide to reject the article, that should show on the, it depends on the preprint server. Research Square, if you post the preprint there and the article is accepted for review, it will show clearly on the page of the article, it will show under review. If the article is rejected, that line will disappear. It won't say it was rejected. It just will show that it's not reviewed anymore, and you can submit to any other journals the same article. So a preprint, except for a very, very small number of journals internationally, a preprint does not prevent you from, the existence of a preprint does not prevent you from submitting to another journal once you got rejected. But maybe that doesn't fully answer your question on preprints. So if you can just elaborate again in case I missed anything.
Yes, thank you, Doc. I think you have answered it very well. I think sometimes if, for example, a journal is rejected, a manuscript is rejected, one would appreciate that automatically it falls off from that domain. But I think maybe it's to do with sometimes unfair reviewers, maybe, or sometimes they forget or something. But I don't know how sometimes we have had challenges, but it's in the public domain. Some people can access it, but you can't pitch where it is exactly. So when you try to submit to another journal, it's like it's already published, but you know it was rejected there. But it doesn't appear directly on the domain of where it was rejected. I think it's some kind of unethical issues here and there between some of the people who are handling this. I'm not going to specifically point to any journal, but I know that we have had some of those challenges. But I think I've got your response.
What I can mention is that I quite frequently get a message from an author to say that my paper, I posted a preprint to a specific repository. I then submitted the article to a journal, and that journal is connected in some way to this repository. And as a result of that, you see a status change on the repository site where it says under review. But my article was rejected a month ago. Why does it say under review? Because now I can't go to another journal. Usually that is just a technical error. And my experience is, if an author, sometimes I do it, sometimes I advise the authors to do it, if they write to the repository and say, it isn't under review anymore, it was rejected, I want to submit it somewhere else, they correct that very quickly. Research Square and Archive you spell ARXIV, and Archive is, it's a huge repository. I saw numbers quite recently. I think at this point they have close to 2,500 preprints from all disciplines. Archive also works with a number of journals. Research Square works with all the Springer Nature journals. And I've experienced that both Archive and Research Square, if you write to them, usually within 6 to 12 hours, they update the status change. So if your paper was rejected, it still shows up as under review. You can write to their help desk, and usually they are very, very quick. Often they're actually quicker than the 6 to 12 hour range. But once again, the important thing to remember about a preprint, so if you post a preprint to whatever repository, whether that's Archive, whether that's RePEC, whether that is Research Square, it will get a DOI. And some authors erroneously think getting a DOI, so document object identifier, they sometimes think a DOI means it now is published formally. It's not. A preprint is not regarded as a formal publication. It is just posting on a repository. Depending on the repository, sometimes the opportunity is given for any reader to post comments to the repository on that paper, and some repositories don't really do that. But that very much is the idea of a repository, that you post it there and then people can freely post comments to that. But either way, by virtue of having a DOI does not mean it is published.
Thank you so much. I know that especially our PhD students moving towards the crossing line, maybe sometimes we'll be seeking your intervention or guidance here and there. I know around that time it could be panicky. Students need to really, sometimes you have already submitted manuscript, maybe didn't make it there. You think now as a condition for that graduation also, you have published this much or some are under review. Around that time, I place that around that time, maybe if you could be kind enough, if those needs arises, even not under your journals, just to give guidance, you can always come back.
Sorry, the sound cut out a couple of times on my end, so I didn't get the question in full.
Yes, I was actually highlighting that, especially for studentship, towards the end of their study. This is where some of these issues arises, because usually under pressure of time, they have to submit their manuscripts, and it's taking longer maybe to give feedback, or it's rejected for any reasons. And then maybe it's not technically taken down. And then when they try to take it somewhere, it looks like it's appearing somewhere, it's being published. And then, but they need to move the next step to certify requirements of their submission. What I was saying is that I know around that time, please bear with us. Sometimes we might need to check with you for maybe further guidance, not necessarily under your journal portfolios anyway. Maybe.
Well, once again, the point about the preprint is if you posted a preprint, that in no way, and your articles are rejected, that in no way prevents your article from being submitted elsewhere. As I mentioned, if there is a query by another journal to say that, hold on, your article shows, your preprint shows as under review, in that case, get in touch with the publisher, get in touch with the preprint repository to amend the status so that the under review part is removed, because that shouldn't be a reason why a paper is not being considered by another journal. One thing that I didn't mention right at the beginning for the students, and this is an extremely important part, because I actually waited to do that tomorrow in the publishing ethics part. Regardless of the journal that you're going to be submitting your article to, at whichever publishing house, it doesn't matter which journal it is, every journal will require you during the submission process to acknowledge that the article is not under review elsewhere at the moment, and that it hasn't been published elsewhere. That is really one of the bedrocks of academic articles, that the article that you submit to a journal is only submitted at that point to that journal, to no other journal, and also that it hasn't been published before. This is something that especially for PhD students, if they don't get very good guidance, this is a point that they might miss. So at the end of your PhD, there's the pressure to publish at least one article, for instance, and you need to do it in a very compressed period of time. So erroneously, some students then think, well, I have very little time to do it in, the pressure is enormous. What I'll do here is to ensure that I get a quick turnaround time is I'm going to submit my article to a number of journals at the same time, and the first one to accept it for review, I'll leave it there, or I will leave it where, if it's accepted at multiple ones for review, I'll leave it there, and then the first one to accept it, I'm going to get it published. It's immensely important to emphasize that is absolutely not allowed. If you talk to your professors, if you talk to your supervisors, they will confirm what I say now, which is that can actually ruin your career, because multiple or duplicate submissions of the same article, a lot of publishers will actually write to your institute and say you've committed this ethical misstep. So it's incredibly important to look very clearly at that. We get a